Greetings and welcome to another great episode of our Black Gay Diaspora podcast. I am your host, Eric, and today I am joined by Rob Berkeley, founder and managing editor at blackoutuk.com, which is, quote, a not for profit social enterprise run and owned by a volunteer collective of Black gay men, end quote. Its mission is to recognize and celebrate the diversity in experiences and views among Black queer men in the UK. Rob is also a writer who contributed to the 2014 anthology Black and Gay in the UK, and his piece is titled The Brotherhood Dilemma. Described as an educationalist with interests in media, creativity, and the arts, Rob has a desire to disrupt power dynamics for the betterment of those on the margins of society. I look forward to learning more about Blackout UK and also what fuels Rob's passion for lifting up himself and others. Greetings, Rob, and welcome. How are you?
I'm very well. It's really good to be here.
I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. I've known about you for probably pretty much since the beginning of this platform. I'm excited and a little nervous, but I always say when the nerves are there, that's a sign that I'm really into what you're doing, and also just to have this type of connection. So yeah, we're recording midweek. How's your week so far?
It's been going quickly, and I've been trying to kind of stand back from social media for a couple of weeks, unsuccessfully so far. So hopefully we'll get a bit more of a rest as the week goes on.
Okay. I, of course, have been, doing my due diligence, finding out more about you and what you do. And I like your Instagram post or your Instagram description. You're described as a thinker, a writer, organizer, and dreamer. But I'd like to ask you, which one would those who know you best describe you?
Oh, those who know me best. Probably as a thinker. Thinking requires action. So I suppose I'm interested in how we establish a relationship between what we think and what we do. Sometimes I describe myself as a recovering academic because I never felt the luxury of debating how many angels could dance on the head of a pin, and it was a practical question. So I wanted to kind of engage with leading edge thoughts, but thinking about what that means for activity.
So, with being a recovering academic, were you like a professor?
I did my PhD. I then ran a racial justice think tank. So I spent quite a lot of time in those kind of policy spaces and writing about identity, politics, and education, which is my first love, I guess. I moved in academic circles, I guess, and I wrote in academic journals. But I'm keen now to be engaged in an activity that changes the world.
What's your educational background?
So I did my first degree in politics, philosophy, economics at Oxford, followed by a master's in education research and then a PhD, looking at our school systems thrive on the exclusion of a certain group of young people.
Okay. When you started university, were you very clear what direction you were going to go in as far as not just your scholastic career, but also where you would go professionally?
I think when I started at Oxford, it's still intended to be a Roman Catholic priest.
Hmm. It's an interesting tidbit. Yeah. Now, I know you're British, but are you currently based in the UK?
Yeah. So I currently live about all of 5 miles from where I grew up. So I'm a South Londoner. My parents are still there. My parents are from Grenada. I'm the youngest of seven. So by the time they got to me, they were pretty expert parents, I think. And I got it quite easy. The lucky last child.
You nicked a wound. I'm the oldest. No,
Ah,
I'm just kidding. The tester child.
the pioneer, right? Let's put it that way.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. I'm going to use that with my siblings. I'm the pioneer. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So, with Blackout UK, could you explain what Blackout UK is?
So it starts from a really simple idea. Actually, it starts from I want to start an organization to save my life. And that's really what we're trying to do at Blackout. I was, 25 years into a career in civil society, working with charities, working on public policy. And at no point had I seen work with my peers, with black queer men, that was valued uh, by those men or valued by the organizations that were delivering it. I wanted there to be better. And I wanted to use what privilege I had stored up for people that I cared about.
So, when did you start or when did you found Blackout UK?
You mentioned the Black and Gay in the UK book. I think at that point I had come up with the name and announced in my article that our response to the Brotherhood Dilemma ought to be to create spaces in which we could practice brotherhood. Our first articles went up on the website in 2015, 16, and in 2018, I left BBC to work on it pretty much full time.
So, this is currently your main professional endeavor.
It's more than just a kind of professional endeavor. I think it feels to me like this is the work I will do, and sometimes I'll be paid for it, and sometimes I'll be able to call it a job, and sometimes I won't.
What is it? That expression, if you find something that you will do for free, that's probably your vocation or your what you're meant to do.
I'm hoping that we'll get to the point soon where there'll be a team of staff and people will be able to call Blackout their job.
I like that you said that you started it because it was a need, but of course, connected to you spreading it out and how it sounds like to create a community.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I was looking for my tribe in a really kind of simple manner, and had been for as long as I could remember, and had spent a couple of decades kind of immersed in the racial justice politics of the UK, and not found my tribe there. So not found a political tribe, but also not found people that were willing to accept me in all my diversity, in all my parts. Done things like chaired the NAS project, been on the board of Stonewall. I was engaged in the kind of work around HIV, changing policy around LGBT rights, or LGB rights as it was at the time, and still not found people that I felt a real strong affinity with, and I'm still, I guess, building that tribe now.
Okay, just kind of absorbing that. Um, are you aware of attempts before Blackout UK of others attempting to do something similar?
I'm not sure how similar, but there's certainly been attempts to organise, attempts to bring people together. I think what marks Blackout from those attempts has been its focus on centering the lived experience of black women rather than an agenda. The last 40 years has been typified by the activity around HIV/AIDS. Really important work, really crucial work. But there hadn't been, as far as I could tell, efforts to build community assets. So I looked around and thought, well, what do we own together? What could we say is a legacy of in terms of what we're giving to the next generation?
Now, do you host or do you sponsor other events?
I still see Blackout, certainly up to now, as a as a laboratory, as a kind of as an experimenter, trying to find the thing that works for the most people that becomes sustainable. So we've held a range of different events. Some of them have been taken on by other organisations now and been emulated and improved upon, and that's great. So we hosted Black Men Who Brunch, which was our attempt to do a day-long kind of workshop that started in us breaking bread together, sharing skills in the afternoon, into some music and some and a more social end of the day, allowing us to talk about some of our challenges around mental health or domestic violence, but also enabling us to connect with each other and find a way of getting to know each other. We've also held club nights and used the dance floor too. We've held what we hope will become an annual lecture in honour of Berto Pasuka, who founded the first European black dance company uh, and was a Jamaican queer man.
Thank you for bringing up Men Who Brunch. I've also been following them, but I wasn't sure if you were connected to them.
And I suppose at all times, Blackout is seeking to stand alongside other black women. In this day and age, actually, that's a real challenge because we're pitted against each other and posed against each other as who can get the most clicks on this social media stuff. What I'm interested in uh, is how do we create a civil society that can hold us, that can support us, and that can uh, lead us from survival to thriving.
Hmm. I've heard from quite a few people throughout the world. It's not unique to us Black queer men, but because of social media and the ease of dating on the apps, that we've kind of lost quite a few of our community spaces.
We talk about the loss of space, but a lot of those spaces from I mentioned places like the Market Tavern or even Heaven have been kind of exploitative of black people, and we've never held the keys. We've been pitted against each other in those spaces rather than allowed to collaborate. So maybe if we're clever enough and motivated enough, we can learn from that and try and create some of those spaces. And that's currently what I'm working on. 150 years ago in London, there were 400 gentlemen's clubs, and they were used largely by the elites to run the country and to run the empire. We're working with uh, Westminster City Council to see if we can, for 6 months, revive one of those clubs and subvert it and have black women set the agenda at it. We can hold space for the rest of society rather than always being the guest.
Okay. I can tell you're a writer and a thinker just in your language and your words. Certain things you say, that's a really great quote and a different way to say something. But when you
Thanks.
mention about us, being more than just visiting a space or an event or even a period of time in the larger communities.
At the weekend, it was Black Pride in London. The success of that event is that it feels like it has a potential for shared ownership amongst people of colour in a way that whoever walk in a Pride London parade, it still feels like we're guests of that rather than owning it. The power that comes from sharing ownership to extend beyond a kind of 12 hours in the park dancing around to music. We could do more than that.
I had a nice surprise and looking at things that you're connected to, and I really like your YouTube series from a few years ago. It's a hashtag Speechless series. I'll be honest, those hit me.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to share those on my social media. But can you tell us about that series?
We wanted to really simple model to enable us to spark a conversation. I think our byline at that time was join the conversation. You know, by just talking about this notion of what it feels like to always to lack verification of your peers, right? Not approval necessarily, but just racism is so insidious. It's really difficult to disentangle whether you're experiencing racism or whether you're just not liked. Many people will be in an office somewhere and they'll say, well, that person, me and him never really got on. And until you can find another black person to connect with and have a conversation with, you can't know whether that is because that person has no antipathy towards black people. I got to the point, I feel, where I believe I was thinking these thoughts, trying to reinterpret what some of the elders had written for now, but not having a space in which I could check in with people. The invitation is open for others to do the same. So there are 4 or 5 of me, but also contributions from Antoine Rogers or Phil Samba. And I would like, when we get back to producing more media, to see more of those.
It's well produced. It looks really nice. And what you say in it just is very relatable, even though, we're both from 2 different countries and backgrounds. If it's okay, there were a couple of things I wanted to quote from that. One of them was from the first one, which is sex, masculinity, and racism. And this one hit me, I'll say, on a visceral level when you said, quote, to be a black man represents in the minds of the powerful the hypermasculine. The powerful in turn fear this form of masculinity and seek to punish you for it. Um, yeah, I felt that one.
Yeah, I think I'm back with these questions again, really, about how is it that we have a conversation about masculinity in a space in which there is so much vitriol about gender. I think black queer men have a particular access to perspectives on that we never really hear. So I just know that there have been many occasions since my kind of first engagement with London's queer scene where I've been used as a way of emphasizing a particular model of patriarchal manhood that I hadn't signed up for. And when I challenge that, it's quite easy because of my black and therefore marginal status to move me out of the picture. So I'm not sure yet that we have the spaces that are sustainable, that we can have conversations in which we grow about how we rethink and reframe masculinity away from patriarchy. And that's a shame because we need it.
Even out walking today in Cape Town in South Africa and being aware when I'm out and to this quote, like I'm aware that the way I walk sometimes when I come across certain individuals is I'm a part of this space too, and I don't want to be minimized because of who you think you see.
That first video is filmed in Soho. I have this real memory of my 20s where I would be openly gay in Zone 1 of London. And by the time I got to outer London, where my parents lived, I would, on that bus ride, somehow fold myself up in somebody who could pass. I'm still healing from the damage I would do to myself on those bus rides, on those night bus rides, trying to protect myself from dealing with the ways in which patriarchal masculinity was constraining my ability to be free. And I watch a whole very youthful generation of men still hankering after the guy who's DL, still trying to avoid look at themselves in the mirror for fear that they might see something which doesn't fit with that idea of patriarchy that's doing them no good.
That's a very powerful visual. I saw like the crow, was it the crow magnon starts crawling or whatever, and then up to who we are today. And the way you just visualize it, it's the reverse. It's like I'm my more authentically myself, say in a gay space or a black gay space. And then when I move going to, yeah, I really, that was powerful. Yeah. That's, I could see that like
Mm.
cinematically, how we just slowly just start to
Yeah,
creep
and
in.
in some ways it feel like a kind of like a flower that would
Yeah.
close on itself. There was also a similar shift where I didn't want to be too black in Soho. My first experience of going to a gay space in Soho was to be questioned about whether I qualified. This is a gay club. Do you know what kind of club this is? The first person that I vocally came out to was a bouncer in a nightclub who challenged whether I was gay enough to get into a club called GAY.
There's a range in how we present, or how I perceive that even just in my own life. Is it, I sometimes wonder if, similar to being hyper masculine, there's this desire with those in positions of power or authority to say, to the reverse of that, you're more palatable to me if you're hyper feminine or less threatening. I don't know.
I think that's the trap. Right? The trap is to concede there are ways of your being that attract more respect than others, and therefore becomes a form of control. The energy that we put into not being ourselves, into denying our full potential, is energy wasted.
We're talking about things that are sources of conflict or pain, but and you doing this series, because it's, another person, a black gay man. So for me, it gives me the courage to say, "Oh, I have those experiences too. Therefore, I'm going to find ways to be my most authentic self." So yeah, I appreciate that. And then also, I think it was in the second video, and I really like this what you said. Scared that I'd open my mouth and overshare. This one hits me. So I shared nothing and shut myself down. So I really like that you put that on film.
I was one of those guys who would rehearse the conversation that I should have had for the hour on the bus on the way home, or and my mother does it still. Actually, she will get off the phone and then recount. Well, I should have said this. I wouldn't say that. Next time, I'm going to say this. I would have said. I should have said. If I was me, I would have said. It's about talking myself down. There's too much joy to be had to spend time denigrating myself. Um, I had developed some tactics around the ways in which I would not speak in spaces, the ways in which I would try and ensure that I was policing other people's racism in
Mm,
space without ever shouting, because I don't want to be perceived as a crazy black woman. That view is gendered in that way. I found a way of speaking, almost a cadence, which was harder to interrupt, but also wasn't loud. While this would work in a kind of seminar room space in which which is a lot of my policy influencing work, it's really bad for television. The rhythms don't really work in that kind of space. So, but I realise now that that was all part of my avoidance of being seen.
yeah, wow. Whew. um,
But there's joy. But I suppose the other end of that. understanding. We are incredibly imaginative, intuitive, uh, and smart in some ways about avoidance, and that's put me in really good stead for the work with Blackout, because I see people circling that offer of brotherhood, that suggestion of, if I was to lean in and support this thing, it would support me back, and I want that. Just I'm not sure yet I could deal with it yet. One of the things I'm really keen that Blackout does is the easiest thing for it to do, which is just to continue to be there, because I understand the way in which we're socialized to avoid intimacy, to avoid the things that we know are good for us.
Do you think the masculinity that we've been talking about, specifically in Black communities, you know, globally, is more rigid than in other communities, other ethnic communities?
And no, I don't think it is. And I think when I visited uh, Ethiopia and saw men walking down the street hand in hand in the 90s, seeing people uh, dance with wild abandon to the Barbara Tucker singing from the States, I would see masculinity that I recognised in both those situations. Just not the masculinity that was represented to me by our media or in spaces in which black men thought the rest of the world might be looking. As somebody who, at the age of 16, danced in Grenada for Carnival, covered in oil, in a group of 50 semi naked men dancing through the streets of this Caribbean island, I can see that our masculinities can do all sorts of things. But the front that we need to put on to resist the racist gaze, I think, limits what we're prepared to share. And hence, I think why I've often pushed for spaces where black queer men are at the centre, because I think it frees up our ability to be honest about the range of masculinities that we're presented with that are traditional to black communities.
Like I always say, we've had these huge social legal advances for, Black communities and for LGBT communities, but I feel that we're still in the shadows. And so what you're doing is giving, I think, well, me, the courage to say, yeah, it's either say it or don't say it.
One of the founding thoughts around Blackout was, why is it that we aren't turning up to receive the services that are being offered? Why is it that we aren't turning up for each other? We've maybe seen what's possible, but are scared of our potential, of what it might mean to actually live it full time.
I think I shared with you the first time we connected a couple of months ago. Black and Gay in the UK. I purchased that book not when it came out, but probably within a year of it coming out when I was still living in Los Angeles. And it was literally timing that when we connected initially, I was at the tail end of the series, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. I know that name. Your piece is one that definitely stood out to me, especially because you touched on the challenges that we as Black gay men face, as we've talked about with racism, homophobia, but also our interactions with other Black gay men. And your scene was very vivid when you talked about being in the bar and another Black man can rebuff a perceived advance. And, I've had that experience. But how was it for you revealing these types of experiences that we can have?
I had the privilege of coming to London after having come out in Oxford and having been one of three for black men regularly on that scene. Right? So the sociologist in me is fascinated by how groups work. Right? So what happens? What happens to us as black men? So there's 100 people at a reception, a kind of professional reception, work reception, and there are 5 black men. Would those 5 men avoid each other all night or find each other? I've been in rooms where both of those things have happened. I've been in rooms where I've been the disruptor who's grabbed the 5 men and, and stood them together in the middle of the room and said, "Well, actually, we're allowed to do this." I thought I might have some insights to bring from that experience of being kind of hyper marginalized to what I thought was just an amazing experience of being upstairs in heaven on a Wednesday night with 200 other black men dancing, or to be at Bootylicious with always, and then people telling me that they weren't connecting with each other. I just couldn't get my head around it. It was for me that was the kind of nirvana that we wanted to reach when the 4 or 5 of us in Oxford actually did finally start to speak, and again to discover that we were being objectified by the same men, that we were being confused for each other constantly, that we were living in a racist city. But we needed to check in with each other to find that out.
Hmm. Yeah, that's something I'm glad that social media is around because, say, online dating became socially acceptable. And I remember going on a coffee meetup with the guy who wasn't black. And at the time, my glasses were still a little bit rose colored, like, oh, we're just people. But it was the first experience where I was very clear that I was not really seen for who I was, but it was just kind of like plug in the numbers. You're black, therefore I don't care what your thought process is, or even if you're attracted to me. And
Yeah.
but how we take those little crumbs of recognition, and sometimes maybe I have to be conscious of not using those tools against each other.
And the misunderstanding of our culture, our heritage, our complex relationship with our blackness, and the ability by others to reduce that to a fetish, to a costume that you might wear, or or something which you could spend you know 50 quid on in Clone Zone and dress up as for one night. That's not what we bring when we bring our blackness to any relationship, even if it's casual or just physical. That's the reduction because people very much see and use color in those spaces to like a costume that can be put on and taken off. I think I've seen some really large steps taken in the last 10 years to start to discuss more openly the levels of objectification in our most intimate moments and our most personal moments that we suffer. These still aren't conversations that I think that we get comfortable having. They're often conversations that are left to our poets or performers to present rather than uh, fit into any kind of dialogue.
With organizations like Blackout UK and discussions, as you mentioned, are there other ways us as Black queer men can heal or start that process?
I hope so. I'm in the process. I really admire the work of Yellow Achille, who is somehow finding a way into those kind of conversations that seem necessary. At Black Melody Brunch, we spent at least 6 months working with a digital health specialist, and I still don't think we managed to break into conversations about mental health or healing that were anything more than kind of markers that at some point we're going to have to deal with this healing thing. I take that as progress, but I wonder whether there's something about London, a kind of British sense of reserve, maybe. I'm really open to to exploring with folk about how we start to break into some of those conversations about how we can be vulnerable with each other, but also how we can emerge from that feeling supported.
You are inspiring others, finding ways to inspire others. Who, past or present, inspires you?
Oh, um, all people who were leading work when I arrived out in London trying to do work. So Mark Thompson and Dennis Carney and Walter Gilgour, and we're immersed in a sector working on HIV that I admire them having the patience to live with and deal with. All those things we put up with, all those little microaggressions, all those daily slights that we experience. Hopefully, those who follow us don't have to experience them. Yeah, so I admire all those guys for that work. But I also people like Dirk Arb Richards who were publishing Black queer poetry in the 80s, and people that would open their homes on a Friday for a meal and allow community to form. Those are the footsteps in which I walk. That's the inspiration. Can we feel like we have a place to call home, a community that we can rely on, even if it's just for one night of the week?
That meal or opening up the home, I felt warmth and definitely intimacy.
Those of us who are in any position of having the networks or experience to create some social change already can really create a platform for certainly for the next generation to go to the stars. Right?
Wow. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for this talk, this interview. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your expertise. Have any final thoughts or insights?
But I'm really keen to do what I can, but I don't know what I can do yet, and I'm still learning. Let's work together. There is a real bonus in coming together on the journey as well as at the destination.
You just reminded me one more time that you're a writer and a thinker with that. So, but where can we engage with you online?
So BLK OUT UK. So either on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and we have a website, blkoutuk.com. And for those in the UK, we have a mobile app community which we're growing intentionally slowly, and that's a Blackout Hub, so BLK OUT Hub, HUB.com. It's about communication, it's about relationships.
Thank you for spending time with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, comment, and subscribe. Share with your friends too. You can also follow us on Instagram at Our Black Gay Diaspora and on Twitter at BLK Gay Diaspora. Until next time.